Thanks for coming. So, I think the introduction was already made for me, so I'm not going to go through that again. But just briefly, my name is Yaniv. I've worked at AWS for just over 7 years now across different roles in solution architecture and what we call go-to-market specialist or business development. Previously, in one of my recent roles, I was leading go-to-market for container services, including ECS and EKS, our Kubernetes service, AppMesh, and many, many others. I've also spent 2 years during the pandemic leading a team in Asia Pacific and Japan, a team of specialist compute SAs, the solution architects, which was a really, really great way for me, though remotely, to get to know the region and the different regions within the Asia Pacific and Japan geo. So that was a great experience. And as said, I was recently tasked to build a go-to-market team that's going to focus on Web3, and we'll talk about that. So probably the first message I would like to land here is that for you guys, when you're running your AWS, your Web3 workloads on AWS, you have a home here with AWS. We have a variety of software, systems, and supporting functions to help you be successful on the cloud in your journey. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but just to name a few from a startup perspective, and I know that most of the audience, not all of it here, is startups. We have the Startup Activate program, and you can find more details in the booth outside. And then we have a variety of supporting functions, industry professionals, including in the space of Web3, that will really help you accelerate your journey. One of the things, and I'll touch upon that a bit later on, that you kind of realize when you start engaging on Web3 is, Web3 is not tremendously different from an IT architecture perspective than any of the other IT and operations services that we have. At the end of the day, it translates into compute and storage and databases and analytics and machine learning. And so, we have over 16 years of expertise in helping you guys drive architecture and IT architecture in a scalable and highly reliable and highly available way. And with the security aspect, that's actually something that I'm going to be touching upon later on in the session. Especially with Web3, when a lot of the ownership that you have on the signing of your Ethereum transactions and your identity, or the digital identity, which means you now hold possession of your own private keys, that actually in turn brings the responsibility back to you, the users, instead of that previously central entity or identity provider that was holding that credential, for you to be able to manage and hold. And that in turn creates a set of challenges that we're here to help you solve as well. But we'll touch upon that later on. So one of the things that I wanted to mention on that, in that context, is we have a variety of things, including training and certification programs. And so one of the things we also have is the Impact Accelerator for the underrepresented entrepreneurs or founders. And that's for the Black and women, Latino, and other. And that's a fund that we have available and being rolled out through cohorts or different cohorts in the ecosystem, as well as the ability to get $100,000 in AWS credit through the Activate program, which I mentioned earlier. And we also have a variety of training and certification tooling that can help you guys validate that you guys are running on the right technology, using or leveraging partners that were accredited and validated to be using AWS services and help create solutions, and a variety of other players in the ecosystem. More specifically, talking about myself, as I mentioned, I was recently tasked with building a team that's only going to focus on that. And that team will have by itself a variety of skill set, including solution architecture and go-to-market, program management. And all of what this team is about to do is to help you guys create a series of solutions and well-architected solutions and best practices, and help you guys shape how a good Web3 application can look like running on the cloud. And we'll touch upon that a bit later on. All right, so I'm not going to go through that in detail. I'm sure some of you probably might have seen those stats. But in terms of the AWS as a platform, the most functionality, I wish I dropped that number on the slide, but every year when you go to reInvent, one of the first slides that we show is kind of representing the pace of innovation. How many new features and capabilities were introduced in the last year? And as you can probably imagine, the graph on that in a year-over-year basis is not linear. So our expansion and pace of innovation on those features and capabilities is driving through dramatically and increasing year-over-year. In addition, we've reduced prices 115 times, and a lot of those 115 were done under no significant competitive pressure because we believe that's the right thing to do for the customers. So every time we as a platform are able to gain different optimizations and further efficiencies in the system, we are rolling those cost savings back to you, the customers, to be able to leverage. And I'll talk a little bit about cost savings a little bit more in detail later on. We have a goal to be carbon neutral by 2025. You can read the details on the AWS website. And we have a lot of security standards, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those customers that we have that are using some of those, like PCI DSS and ISO and many others. I'm not going to regurgitate, but you guys know the journey, right? Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. But the way I look at it, mostly Web 1, the beginning of the internet back in the late 90s, mostly static websites. If you had a website, you can participate. If you're not and you're a consumer, there's no way for you to express yourself or participate in the internet itself other than making purchases. Web 2, which kind of started around 2005, is a different story, and that kind of being encapsulated by social media, for example, in which now you have the power to tweet and post and like or dislike posts, right? So you're now participating in the game, but there's no way for you to monetize it yet. Or there's no way for you to get a contribution that's based on the contribution that you make to that whatever network or social network that may be. And Web3 is the next evolution of that. It's really important to lay out that Web3 is not a binary thing. It's not the world is turning into Web3 in one day. And not every application that's being designed today with a premise of having a Web3 label on it will necessarily be completely and entirely decentralized in all its aspects. And I think that's a really, really important message to land. It's not an zero-sum game, and it's not an all or nothing. It's evolution, and we will have, like, a lot of what my team is doing already with customers is the conversation of, what makes sense to be run on-chain and versus what maybe makes sense to be run off-chain with traditional databases and other compute services, storage services. And I'll touch a little bit upon that in the reference architecture I'll show later on, but really kind of just to level set everyone, this is something that's going to be an evolution, and what we have to do is kind of find what is the sweet spot of really kind of taking the steps towards that direction while not necessarily meeting a full Web3 utopia right from day one. So talking a little bit about the typical Web3 application stack, and probably most of you may be familiar, but I'll go over it. So from an interoperability point of view, we have different layers of the stack, right? We like to refer to the layer 0 as projects that basically allow the entire blockchains to be built on top of them. And we'll talk about what these blockchains are, but just as an example, you may have heard of the Binance chain was built on top of what we call the Cosmos SDK, just as an example. The other thing that these layer 0s allow you to do is gain some interoperability between different blockchains that are running using those SDKs. So it's kind of like a cross-chain interoperability that's being achieved. One layer higher than that, these are what we refer to as the layer 1 blockchains. Essentially, the main or primary responsibility of a layer 1 blockchain is the settlement of transactions. Now, settlement of transactions mean that they also need compute. There is a thing called validator nodes that many of you will know from the Ethereum world, and that requires compute, whether it's a proof of work, which was probably the first, most well-known consensus algorithm, and proof of stake, which probably a lot of you know has been driven in the merge that was done this week for the Ethereum 2.0. That's something that will require way less compute resources from a GPU processing point of view. However, do not make a mistake, it will still require compute. So validator nodes will still be required. And the requirement here is to conduct what we call the consensus algorithm, or in plain words, to agree on that a certain transaction has been settled within the blockchain. And then on top of that, we have sidechain, or not sidechain, layer 2 solutions, which I will touch upon in a bit. But essentially, these layer 2s, they have their own, usually have their own consensus mechanisms, and they provide certain levels of, efficiency, which I will talk about in a few slides. So looking at a traditional Web3 application for a typical D app or decentralized app that wants to run itself on top of a blockchain. So a few things that I want to call out here. One thing is, if you look at the authentication, in a typical Web 2 architecture, kind of thinking back, traditional Web 2, right? Like a 3-tier application, users do a login request using a username and a password, and those credentials are being then validated and saved with a centralized identity provider. It can be, for example, if you're logging into the social network, it can be Google or Facebook, or with AWS we have Amazon Cognito, which allows you to create some user pools and manage those credentials. So there are a lot of ways. In the Web3 world, as I mentioned earlier, however, it's a bit different. How is it different? It's different in the sense that now each user essentially has a private key, and that private key is being used to validate and sign on that whatever Ethereum transaction he's trying to make, he or she. So the wallet, the term wallet is actually kind of like a wrapper for the user's private key. So now instead of having like a login with a username and password, the typical button that you will see on a decentralized application will be connect to your wallet. And so in turn, those credentials need to be signed and need to be validated by someone. Now the question remains is who and how those credentials are being saved, and how or what is a secure way to sign an Ethereum transaction, for example. And AWS has solutions that can really help you do that to meet certain compliances in probably the most secure way possible. And one of the options I'll talk about, I'll mention further, will be Nitro Enclave, but I'll touch upon that a bit later on. Now, from a blockchain perspective, the blockchain is the data availability layer, so this is where all the transactions are actually being settled, and this is also the layer that's responsible to aggregate and hold the data, essentially the transactions, the data, the blocks. So a lot of startups are not necessarily wanting to go into the business of managing their own nodes and running the entire, what we call the blockchain network by themselves. It involves a certain heavy lifting. There are numerous ways to go about this and solve this. We have a service called Amazon Managed Blockchain that helps do that. But there are third-party providers that also help, including, for example, Alchemy and Infura and Metatask. So MetaMask, for example, are an example for both a provider and a signer. So they will also be responsible for helping you do that authentication and save those credentials and do the verification on the sign of the transaction for Ethereum. But they will also be the providers, the layer 1 that will basically give you an API, and they will manage the list of the blockchain nodes on their behalf and give you queryable APIs to help retrieve and settle your transactions. If you don't want to be using a layer 1, you can also use other solutions. And for example, one of the ways I posted here is called the Graph, which is basically an indexing solution that, again, the user can use to help index all of the data in the underlying blockchain and help perform queries against that data. Now, some of the data, and the Graph is, by the way, it's an off-chain solution, so it's something that is being deployed separately. Again, speaking of on-chain and off-chain solutions, some of the components in your architecture will be on-chain, some of them will probably not, and that's completely okay and legitimate. Now, since it's expensive and slow to store all of the data directly, then sometimes the data will also be stored off-chain as well, and therefore there are a number of protocols and solutions, including IPVF and other solutions that can help you basically store the blockchain data and have access to it. So that's essentially a few of the kind of underlying, I would say, typical trends that we see when we talk about the classic application or decentralized application running on top of a typical blockchain. There is another way. So building a decentralized application on Ethereum can get very slow and costly if we have like high gas fees, and it will result in basically a very bad user experience for your application. And so a lot of our customers are also using layer 2 blockchain, which I have mentioned earlier, and Polygon here is that's in the audience today is one of them. Polygon is actually an example of a sidechain, so they are not actually relying on the underlying Ethereum blockchain as the data availability layer, but they actually run, I believe, 18 sidechains, and Polygon folks keep me honest, but I believe 18 sidechains that they have, which are the transactions that you, as an application post, are being settled on their own sidechains and are then being communicated as a transaction every once in a while to the primary blockchain. And so that level of aggregation will accelerate your application, although and will result in faster settlements, although it will not be as decentralized probably as like an Ethereum public blockchain. All right, so in terms of customers, we are still in early days, so we have witnessed a lot of customers that are actually using AWS for Web3. However, not all of them are currently referenceable, and one of the big tasks that my team has is actually come to a point where we publish on a regular basis a series of not only public case studies for customers that are running, but also the architectural fundamentals that they're using. So kind of like a series of best practices of if you want to run Ethereum blockchain on AWS using X technology, this is how you do so. And we have some of that out there already, and we'll continue to iterate and post more as we go by. But I will just do some name dropping on you now, of just a few. So in the cryptocurrency exchange world, I'm sure many of you know Coinbase. So basically Coinbase is a secure currency exchange that allows you to buy and sell and trade cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and Ethereum and other coins. It's one of the largest Bitcoin consumer wallets in the world today, and it's also the first regulated Bitcoin exchange in the United States. So they're using a variety of services, but one of the ways that they were able to leverage is actually Amazon Pinpoint, which is our multi-channel marketing platform, which allows them to interact with their own users through a series of SMS and email and push notifications, all in a managed fashion. Again, a lot of these companies, because they hit a big scale, they will want to rely a lot on managed services and remove all the operational heavy lifting as much as they can, and this is where Amazon's managed services come in and help them kind of simplify and take away like everything that's not mandatory for them to run by themselves. Another example is Crypto.com. That's actually from this region, Asia Pacific, Japan. They're based in Hong Kong. They have about 5 million users, so they're a pretty big exchange. And what that means, they need like a 24/7 reliable connectivity. They're relying on AWS's compute services and network services, including Amazon Transit Gateway, that helps them establish VPN tunnels across different regions and establish encrypted communication across all of these in a secure fashion. And then Blockfile is a DeFi application. It's basically a series of wealth management products, including US dollar loans and other products that they offer in the market. And so they've also built their platform on top of a variety of like Amazon's or AWS's compute services, including Amazon ECS or Elastic Container Service, AWS Lambda, who's our cloud function service, our RDS, who's our relational database service, and other services. Again, I will go through that just to show you just a variety of the services that we have. But if you want to build your application on top of AWS, we have pretty much in any category that you can imagine, whether it's compute or databases or storage or analytics, there are a variety of ways that we can help you achieve your goals, and the goals may be on the performance level, they may be on the security and accreditation level. For example, Crypto.com was able to achieve things like PCI DSS certifications and ISO 27001. So those are things that are industry standards that by using AWS standards that are already compliant with those, help you really tick those boxes and meet regulation faster. Now, one of the few examples, and again, it's a broad array of services, some examples that I would throw here that I've heard from customers. So for example, if you want to run a set of node validators on AWS, a very typical way to do so would be Amazon EKS, our managed Kubernetes service. The reason for that is when you have a series or a cluster of nodes that need to have communication across them, container and container orchestration is kind of like a default solution for you. It really helps simplify the setting up of the cluster, the deployments, the upgrades, the maintainability in general of the cluster. And so relying on the Kubernetes community, it's also open source, and you can enjoy a lot of what we call the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or CNCF ecosystem tooling that sits across and around that. Plus, EKS itself provides a lot of other AWS integration with services like our key management service, for example, KMS, and other services to help you really kind of glue in all of the different pieces of your architecture together. So this is one example. The other example on the security front is Nitro Enclaves. If you want to, for example, sign your Ethereum transaction in a secure way, you probably will do a good job if you use Nitro Enclaves. Nitro Enclaves is based on what we call the Nitro architecture that AWS has. It's an underlying hypervisor technology that powers a lot of our instances and basically provide isolated environment, a fully isolated environment that runs within your EC2 instance, but is not accessible even from within your AWS EC2 instance, even through root users or SSH keys. There is no way that you can communicate. There is a single encrypted channel that can be used to communicate between the Nitro Enclave and the EC2 instance. And so it's very well protected, and there is an attestation that's happening there that really makes it bulletproof and secure. So if you want to learn more, we do have content that is either already out or about to be published on how to leverage that service to help your Ethereum transaction sign. It's also integrated with KMS, our key management service, and so you can really help glue the whole thing together. We have, like I mentioned, a variety of compute services ranging from Amazon EKS to ECS to Lambda. Lambda will give you a fully serverless experience without having to spin up a single server. And so is AWS Fargate, which is a container technology that's serverless. So really a very broad array of compute, storage, databases, and analytics services that you can help in order to run and power your decentralized applications. As far as roadmap, so one of the things, like I said, that my team is going to do and is already doing is engaging with a lot of the customers around what are the different use cases that you're trying to run and how can we as AWS help you solve them. But in turn, what this also means for us is that we'd like to hear from you what's not working well. Where are there any gaps within our solutions that we can help address for you? And so, working backwards from customer requirements is mandatory and very ingrained within the Amazon's DNA and culture. And so we'd like to hear from you. If you see that one of the services that we use, we have features that are missing for you, there are some capabilities that would make your life way easier or simpler to use, please reach out to us. I know the team for us is working on the next iteration of services and features also on the Web3 world, and the two that you see here are probably the biggest two topics that we have in our focus right now. Number one would be how to make the blockchain data easier to access. And so like I said, Amazon Managed Blockchain helps you set up blockchain Ethereum nodes and then basically allows you to communicate and run queries on top of them. However, we would like to make it even more simple and more abstracted than it is today. So that's one direction that we're going at. And the other one is reducing the burden of developing smart contracts. For those of you who don't know, smart contracts are kind of like the programmable logic that you run on top of the Ethereum network. And so that will essentially be a fundamental building block in how the blockchain will behave and what kind of tasks and towards what goal it will work for. So if you have any good feedback on either of those, or if there are like other things in that list that are missing on the stage and you feel like, no, you guys should actually be working on this because this is our biggest problem today, we would love to hear that from you. The main reason I flew here from the greater Seattle area where I live is because I wanted to interact with each and every one of you. I have some sessions scheduled, but I would also want to at least say hello and speak and listen to each and every one of you as possible. I'll be around for the whole day to do that, so I would love and welcome the opportunity to hear any feedback whatsoever on that. Some final thoughts. So day one culture, that's actually an Amazon thing. We always talk about it's always day one. But the other thing is that we have at Amazon is we're kind of decentralized to begin with, the way Jeff Bezos kind of shaped the way the company operates. And I don't know, as some of you might have heard the term two pizza teams. Two pizzas is because like there's not many people, so two pizzas will be enough for everyone to have dinner. And it essentially means we have a series of small teams. Each of them, however, is empowered and has full autonomy to execute on their own section of whatever it is that they're chartered to do. And working that way, it really enables us to help accelerate and help customers faster. Because when you engage with the teams and you engage with those customers, those teams already have what it needs to be able to do to help create solutions, to help shape what other features and services are. And so, instead of working in one big team that moves slowly, we are actually decentralizing ourselves to a series of quite a lot of teams. My team today has to interact with quite a lot of teams in AWS, and I find that to be a really great thing because really each of them has its own unique expertise and skill set and perspective, and together we can actually help shape like holistic motions, whether it's development and engineering and product and go-to-market and anything else that you can think of. Second point I wanted to make was, working backwards. I think I've covered that now. And then if you have any more questions on how AWS can help you as a startup, then that is the landing page that you should go for. And then finally, and you can't have a session without getting into that. As I mentioned, I'm hiring a pretty big team across the globe. It's going to be in APJ as well. And we're going to be hiring across different roles, solution architecture and go-to-market specialists. So again, if you're interested, go to our Amazon.jobs website, look us up. There are quite a few Web3 roles that are open at the moment. We're welcome to talk to you and help you get on board. All right, so with that, I just want to say, again, really, really appreciate everyone coming in today. I really think that you guys deserve a round of applause because really for us, I can't begin to say how meaningful that is for me to have that one-to-one direct interaction with each and every one of you. We learn a ton every time we speak to you guys. We hope to continue the momentum. I want to say and extend like a big thanks to the startup team and the various teams in AWS and Intel, everyone that around us that helped make this day happen. I'm so thrilled to be here. I feel privileged. So thank you so much, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of the day.